all that's happening when you take methylene blue is it increases your serotonin, and that's why you feel better. But frankly, that's and I want to make it clear to people that even though it's controversial, even though nobody really knew about it until about 6 months ago, there's lots that methylene blue can do. About 94% of US adults have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction. This is the part of our cell that make energy, right? So they have memory issues, they have concentration problems, they have fatigue, they have mental health problems, they have chronic pain. The one pathway that causes the most mitochondrial dysfunction is actually insulin resistance. The mitochondria are not able to make the energy that they need to make, and methylene blue can come in there and start helping compensate for that mitochondrial dysfunction. So you feel more energy, more cognitive capacity, less exercise-induced fatigue, less pain, less inflammation.
And Dr. Scott Sherr turns this into reality.
He's revealing the power of methylene blue and how it might change your life.
I get stories all the time, like my anxiety went away after I took methylene blue, or my depression completely resolved. 2 gentlemen that had lost their wives, they were both not doing well, not getting up, depressed, grieving. 4 milligrams of methylene blue, and they were getting off the couch, they were starting to get outside, they were calling their family, and they were like different people. And so as soon as you start making the mitochondria more efficient, it's like snapping your fingers with some people like that.
Does methylene blue help with fat loss or losing weight?
Yes, you can actually see greater fat loss without losing as much muscle.
Does it cause a blue brain? Today, we're talking about a compound that has been used for over 150 years, and now it's being recognized as the strongest legal performance enhancer out there. This compound is methylene blue. It is being called the magic bullet for its ability to work as a mitochondrial enhancer, an antioxidant, and a nootropic. And even Dr. Eric Berg praises it. Dr. Boz is using it. And what's exciting is that it can even support you and your health, even if you're doing a ketogenic or a carnivore diet. My guest today is Dr. Scott Sherr. He's a physician and an expert in integrative health and performance medicine. And he's going to explain exactly what is methylene blue, how to use it safely, why the dose is critical, and share other powerful tools like enhancing the GABA system and red light therapy. So Dr. Sherr, my first question, if somebody's just clicked on this episode and they see methylene blue, what conditions would benefit most from using methylene blue?
That's a very loaded question, Rena. There's lots that methylene blue can do, even though it's controversial, even though nobody really knew about it until about 6 months ago in January 2025. But we'd been using it clinically for over 5 years and actually created one of the first companies to create a commercial product using methylene blue back in 2020. And when we first got involved in looking at methylene blue, we looked at some of the studies that were being done relatively around the time that we actually launched the company. And there's one very specific one that looked at cognitive enhancement, basically with normal people using methylene blue, and they had MRI scans. Actually, they did at the same time. They showed that when you give them 1 dose of methylene blue, you get significant improvements in their cognition, their memory, their focus, their visual processing as well. And that kind of gave us this kind of idea that, wow, something's happening in the brain when you take methylene blue. And then kind of looking at the research from there, it became quite obvious to us that what methylene blue really was doing in that particular study, and then really across the board for over 100 years now, is significantly improving mitochondrial function. And so when you look at the statistics out there for just the overall burden of mitochondrial dysfunction. About 94% of US adults, at least, have some element of mitochondrial dysfunction. This is where the mitochondria, this is the part of our cell that make energy, right? So energy is ATP, that's our energy currency. Fun fact is we make about 165 pounds of ATP every single day. So that's like 70 kilos or maybe a little bit less than that of ATP every single day. And we have to make this to maintain the capacity of our body to make energy, whether it's in our brain, our heart, our musculoskeletal system. And interestingly enough, we have some cells in our body that have tons of mitochondria. Some, like our eggs and sperm, actually have the most mitochondria per cell. Then just behind that is our brain, our heart, our liver, our musculoskeletal tissue. And so what do people have as far as symptomatically when they have mitochondrial dysfunction? They have memory issues, they have concentration problems, they have exercise-induced fatigue, they have mental health problems, they have chronic pain, they have chronic inflammation, because the mitochondria are not able to make the energy that they need to make. And the thing about making energy is that it's not free. What I mean by that is that we make energy in our mitochondria, but at the same time, we actually we make these waste products of energy metabolism, including things like water and carbon dioxide, when we make energy, but we also make these things called free radicals, reactive oxygen species. And the body has to be able to neutralize those. It has this capacity because we take in antioxidants, things like vitamin C and vitamin D and melatonin even actually is one of our most powerful antioxidants in our mitochondria. People don't know that. And so you have the need for these antioxidants to neutralize that energy that you're making. So you have this sort of major burden of mitochondrial dysfunction. We have all these mitochondria in our various areas in our body that are responsible for helping us make energy. Some have more, some have less, depending on where you are. And the major reasons for mitochondrial dysfunction, to kind of get into your question really, is about 5 different things. Okay. The first major reason why we have mitochondrial dysfunction, it's a big term, but it's going to be called stress. So this is when our sympathetic, our fight or flight nervous system is just on all the time for various reasons. It could be because of stress in a relationship. It could be because of stress in a job. It could be from stress because you're not getting enough sleep, for example. And then the mitochondria get significantly dysfunctional because you have this sort of hormonal and neurotransmitter deficiencies that happen as a result. And the mitochondria try to compensate, and things just kind of go spiral down from there. So stress is the big category. Also infections, post-infectious syndromes like your long COVIDs, your molds, your Lymes. These things are all going to affect mitochondrial function. In addition, you have things like medications as well that also will cause mitochondrial dysfunction. And you have all certain toxins on our environment as well that'll also cause mitochondrial dysfunction. So all of these things are kind of playing around in your mitochondria as a result of all these exposures that we get as being in the world that we live in now. And so where methylene blue comes in, and with all that kind of preamble, is that it works on that mitochondrial level to enhance mitochondrial function. So it can compensate for mitochondrial dysfunction no matter where you might have it. And it also can help on both the energy side and the detox side. Meaning that can help you make more energy, and it can help you with the detoxification. It can work just like an antioxidant, just like it works to help you make more energy as well. So high level there is that where methylene blue kind of falls into the modern world is that 94% of us have mitochondrial dysfunction. Methylene blue can come in there and start helping compensate for that mitochondrial dysfunction so you feel better faster, and also can kind of in the top level of if you're an endurance athlete or an elite athlete and things like that, it actually can help on that level too.
It makes sense because you first started off with the cognitive benefits, which means in the brain. So if somebody's experiencing brain fog, maybe it could also be mental health issues, dementia, Alzheimer's. So that's one component. There's also other different components. So when I was researching this, it's fascinating. And I just thought, how can this one little compound do so many different things? But interestingly, it can also improve or fix or help fix insulin resistance. What is that pathway?
So actually the one pathway that I forgot that causes the most mitochondrial dysfunction is actually insulin resistance. And insulin resistance, the idea is your blood sugars are high. And so what that kind of correlates to in your mitochondria is that there's too much glucose around. If there's too much glucose around in the mitochondria start getting very upset. They start making too much energy and they make too much of these reactive oxygen species. And so the whole system starts breaking down. So actually the number one cause for mitochondrial dysfunction is actually insulin resistance. And what's interesting about methylene blue is that it's coming into the cell and helping support both that energy and detoxification. So in essence, what it's doing is sort of cleaning up metabolic function and helping you be able to utilize energy more effectively in your mitochondria. It's not a direct treatment for insulin resistance, okay? But it does help support the mitochondria, especially if there's insulin resistance around. And certain medications actually in diabetes, for example, metformin. Metformin is a drug that's been touted in longevity circles for many, many years. But metformin actually has a destructive stimulus on the first complex in the mitochondria that helps you make energy called complex 1. And so even though it's helping diabetic management, it's also causing significant mitochondrial stress. So if you don't have diabetes, if you're not obese, if you exercise, it's very unlikely that metformin is going to be a very good drug for you over time because of this mitochondrial dysfunction that you're going to get. And so methylene blue can compensate for some of that, but in essence, it's not really a treatment for insulin resistance directly. It's more of an indirect treatment because it helps mop up and clean up and make the mitochondria more efficient.
I just thought it was very fascinating because so many people have this problem, insulin resistance, and we're hearing it much more these days. And especially on my carnivore keto group, people say they want to learn about insulin resistance. So anything that can just help with that. But I do want to say that along with this methylene blue, that we do need to have a very anti-inflammatory lifestyle. So this doesn't take away, like people can't eat donuts and chips and take methylene blue and think everything is fine. Can you elaborate on the other things that we have to focus on as well, just briefly?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm an internal medicine physician. I have a clinical practice called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And the idea with the whole practice is based on a nonprofit organization. A colleague of mine, a mentor, his name is Dr. Ted, who created this framework that he called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And the idea really was, you need to focus on foundational biochemistry for people. When you go to the doctor, your conventional GP, they're looking for disease markers. They're looking for things that like early signs of disease so they can catch them early so you don't have that whole disease sequela, the whole process happen over time. But the goal with health optimization medicine is to focus on optimizing foundational biomarkers, something called metabolomics, which is a study of these little small molecules that are involved in metabolism, basically helping you make energy, helping you detox your macros, your micronutrients, heavy metals, fatty acids, and minerals and things like that. Because that's the foundation of your biochemistry, your biology. And so the key always when I'm thinking about working with somebody is that there's this foundation that we need to work on, this foundation of optimizing vitamins, minerals, nutrients, diet, lifestyle, getting off the chips and the alcohol, getting better sunlight, getting better sleep overnight and in the evenings, even taking naps. If you like naps, you can take naps. I like naps, right? So, but the key with all of that is that what most people want to feel is better tomorrow, but oftentimes it took them 40, 50, 60 years to get to where they feel. So it's not likely going to happen with that kind of approach. It's a great approach. It's a sustainable one, but it takes time. It takes 6 months or a year to kind of see those benefits. So I work with people. I get foundational biomarkers that you wouldn't get from a normal conventional GP. I look at all the sort of array of things that are happening in your cells and making them healthy, both your gut, your mitochondria, your cells, your neurotransmitters, your hormones. You look at all of those. And what we do with our perspective, we shift all of your nutrient and gut networks, hormone networks back to when you were 21 to 30 years of age, because that's when you're most optimal. You're not most optimal when you're 45. I'm 45. I'm not most optimal anymore. I don't want to be normal for a 45-year-old. I want to be optimal for somebody between 21 and 30 years of age. And so the goal for our practice is to get everybody over there, right? We take people outside of this system where you're just normal for your age. We don't want that. We want to be optimal. And we look at these foundational biomarkers that help you get there with nutrient, gut, neurotransmitter, hormone networks. Yeah, and in addition, we're not looking at this sort of the organ specific here. We're looking at that cellular specific, right? And this is actually something that's very different from when you go to a conventional doctor. You get like cardiologists, you see a heart, lung doctors, a pulmonologist, et cetera. And so the goal really is to go deeper than that, go to the cellular level, and that's that metabolomic level that I was mentioning. And so, but again, all of that takes time. And what's beautiful about with Methylene Blue, like you can take it and start using it very, very quickly, even if you have a long way to go to getting better. And it gives that subtle and supportive, holistic kind of feel for people because it gives them more energy, but also gives them more detox at the same time. The problem is that most things out there are going to either give you more energy, give you more detox, and not both at the same time. And so if you're enhancing energy, enhancing detox, you're supporting the system in a way that allows you to start feeling better very quickly. So you can start at very low doses of Methylene Blue, 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, 16, and all of a sudden you just start, okay, a little more energy, a little bit better. My mood's a little bit better. Like my little pains and aches in the morning are just slightly better. Now I can start taking my supplements, change my diet. And start going for a walk around the block, these kinds of things. And so I found it to be like a really great way to get people started, Rena. The problem oftentimes is that it's very difficult to get started. And then, and then as you're getting more optimized, as you're, getting your mitochondria back on board, you're getting better sunlight, you're drinking better hydration, you're not having alcohol, maybe you've divorced a partner, or you're sleeping in a different room because you guys were snoring and now it's better. Hopefully somebody got checked for sleep apnea in that process, right? And so all of that is happening. You're starting to feel better. Then you don't need as much Methylene Blue because like, oh man, this is good. I feel pretty good in the morning. I don't need the Methylene Blue to kind of support my mitochondria because now I'm kind of doing it on my own. So the key for the way I think about using it is that some people need Methylene Blue some of the time, and then some of the people need Methylene Blue all of the time for some of the time in the beginning when they're still working on that foundational approach. So, and I'm a huge fan of the ancestral approach. I'm a huge fan of, really moving people away from the standard American diet. And I do all this stuff all the time in clinical practice, but oftentimes it's not enough because you have this mitochondrial dysfunction that's not going to get better unless you really focus on these sort of foundational biochemistry perspectives on how to optimize their mitochondrial function. And also look at that fight or flight response too. That's often still in high mode, even if they've changed their diet as well.
So that is so fascinating, because if somebody eats some food and they think, okay, I'm eating a carnivore diet or ketogenic diet, that can explain why that food, that energy is not getting into the cells, because complex 1 and complex 2 is broken in that pathway. And later we'll talk about this. I want to go back to Methylene Blue so people can understand that one first. But I want to talk about all about this, because I think people have that issue. They're starting a diet, they're starting this new supplement or something. It's not working because it's not getting into the cell. Exactly what you said, which is a cellular function. So let's go into understanding what is Methylene Blue. Back in the 1800s, what was it used for and what is it used for now?
Yeah, so it was originally developed as a textile dye, actually. So a very blue pigment that was used to dye blue jeans blue, actually, back in the 1870s. But they were doing all these experiments trying to find something that could work for infections. And they did a whole study of this back in the 1880s and 90s. And they found out that malaria itself was highly susceptible to being killed by methylene blue. So it was the first drug registered with the US FDA back in 1897 as a treatment for malaria. And it was called the magic bullet at the time, actually, because it had this capacity to kill the malaria itself, but actually not harm the human host, because it was very difficult to find something that you could use at high doses like methylene blue, but also not be a detriment or not harm the human cells at the same time. And so methylene blue had this first sort of chapter of its existence as, well, I guess first chapter would be as a textile dye. Second chapter would be as a treatment for malaria and other infections. And it was one of the primary antimicrobials available until the 1950s, until penicillin came around. So it was used for urinary tract infections, used for fungal infections, viral infections. In fact, up until 1970s or 80s, if you lived in an Eastern European country, you would get methylene blue if you had a viral infection. If you had a sore throat, they would actually paint the back of your mouth with methylene blue. And that would be the way that you got rid of your viral infection in a couple of days. And it works that way very, very well. And at these higher doses of methylene blue, it's a fantastic anti-infective. And so that was the second chapter of methylene blue, more as an anti-infective. And it still is, and we still use it that way, although it became out of favor because when antimicrobials came around, like penicillins and other things like that, they had the benefit of not turning your urine blue. So methylene blue at almost any dose, but especially high doses, is going to turn your urine blue. And at very high doses is going to turn other secretions blue as well. And maybe your brain, we can get back to that, but only very, 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 very high doses of methylene blue. But the anti-infective doses of methylene blue are around 1 milligram per kilogram. So about 70 milligrams, 50 to 70 milligrams and above overall. But after the 1950s, it's no longer is used really in human medicine as an antimicrobial for a long time. It was used in fish tanks. And so if some of you've heard of methylene blue being in fish tanks, that is true. Methylene blue doesn't actually treat the fish tank. It treats the fish as an anti-fungal, anti-inflammatory. But the problem with fish tank cleaner methylene blue is it's highly contaminated with heavy metals, lead, mercury, arsenic, and cadmium. So you don't want to drink methylene blue from fish tank cleaner. In fact, you don't want to drink, you have to be very careful about the methylene blue sourcing you get, because even pharmaceutical grade methylene blue, the USP grade, is still sometimes contaminated. And I can tell you a lot of the liquids on the market, because we've looked at this, do not meet their label claims at all from a potency perspective. And there's lots of questionable certificates of analysis coming from other countries that are not being validated here in the US.
Okay, so it makes sense what it is. And so basically it's got a long history back from the 1800s. So it's important to understand that it is a compound. It's not a natural compound, so it's a synthetic compound, but it is important for people to understand that, but how it can actually work in the body. So let's move on to that. So let's understand now how methylene blue can be worked in the body, what's actually happening to help with the mitochondria. You mentioned there's a redox. It's a redox molecule. Can we explain what that means for people?
Yeah, sure. So after it becoming an antimicrobial, it was a fish tank cleaner. It still is, right? Then it also got a couple different lives as well. And this will get to your question, which is the first antipsychotics were actually derived from methylene blue, because methylene blue works as something called the monoamine oxidase inhibitor, an MAOI, which increases the amount of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine you have in the synapse. So it's kind of a mood boosting compound as well. And some of the first antipsychotics were actually derived from it. And then from there, that's when we get into the mitochondria, right? So the mitochondria are these really amazing organelles. They're part of our cells. They used to be their own bacteria probably millions of years ago. And our cells kind of co-opted them because of how efficient they are at making energy. So what they basically are doing, right, is taking the food that we eat, the food that we, especially fat, and carbohydrates, bringing that into our mitochondria, and then taking the electrons off the food, putting them on NAD and FAD, which NADH and FADH, and those go directly into the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. The mitochondria is a double membrane. It's got an outer membrane and internal membrane, and this is an internal space and external space of where things kind of happen. And you have these complexes on them, complex 1, 2, 3, and 4, where these electrons get shuttled through these complexes from complex 1 and complex 2, where they're donated, NAD and FAD respectively. And as these electrons are going through, you get this called this gradient, basically from this outer to inner membranes in the mitochondria themselves. And then when oxygen comes in, oxygen becomes the final electron acceptor in the mitochondria. That's why we need to breathe oxygen, and allows that electrons to have a sink, have a place to go. And then as the electrons kind of go through and get picked up by oxygen, they made into water, carbon dioxide, reactive oxygen species. And as these protons come through this gradient, you make ATP, or adenosine triphosphates. This is the 165 pounds of ATP we were talking about in the beginning. So where methylene blue comes in is on both sides of this. Okay, so if any of these complexes aren't working very well, so complex 1, 2, 3, or 4, what methylene blue can do is actually can bypass or compensate for the challenges that these complexes might be having. And so as a result of that, you can recycle things like NAD and FAD back into their form so they can pick up more electrons from your food, and the flow of electrons still can maintain through the electron transport chain, even if you have one complex that's not working very well. So, for example, if complex 1 isn't working very well, which happens with infection, which happens with stress, what happens with toxins in our environment, medications, like I talked about metformin earlier, which complex 1 gets destroyed by, you can bypass it. You can actually donate electrons directly to complex 3, and then you can maintain flow through complex 3 and 4. So you don't have as much energy produced as if you had all 4 complexes working together, but you can still have some. And the classic example of this is something that I hope nobody here listening to gets, is cyanide poisoning. Okay. What cyanide does is a complex 4 destroyer. So it basically destroys that final complex that's required for you to have the free flowing of electrons through it, so that you have oxygen that picks up on complex 4. All that gets destroyed by cyanide. But what methylene blue can do is actually can bypass all of that and maintain your capacity to make some energy. Now, not a lot of energy, but more energy than you would otherwise, and enough energy to hopefully buy you time so that you can actually get, the remedy of cyanide, the cyanide antidotes, right? But there really is not a lot of cyanide antidotes. It's really just letting it go away over time. And then you have something that's compensating for while cyanide is actually on board. So that's the essence of what methylene blue can do on the energy side, is that it can really compensate for any aspect of that electron transport chain that's not working well. It can combine things with things like red light, for example, as well. So red light, 680 nanometers or so, donates electrons to complex 4 in the mitochondria, and methylene blue can do the same, actually. So one question we always get is like, well, if you have a normal working electron transport chain, should methylene blue be taken or not? And the answer is that very likely, if you have a normal electron transport chain, you don't need to take methylene blue often, but you could probably take it when you're under more stress. So if you're flying places, if you're not sleeping as well, if you're on bad lighting, if you get a bad night of sleep, that's all going to cause mitochondrial stress. And the other side of this, of course, is that there's a detoxification part of it. Methylene blue, as I mentioned earlier, works on both sides, because when we make energy, we also make products of energy metabolism as well. We make reactive oxygen species, these ROS, or free radicals. And what methylene blue does there is that it has the capacity, just like I mentioned earlier, to work just like an antioxidant. And so just like your vitamin C's or your NAC or your glutathione or things like that, these are all things that are neutralizing oxidative stress, and methylene blue can do the same. So when we talk about redox, Rena, to get back to your question, is that redox really means that you can do both. You can both enhance energy production and you can enhance detoxification at the same time. And there's very few other compounds out there that do this redox cycling. There's a couple. There's hydrogen, for example, that may do it, and also PQQ can do it in different ways. But really, when it comes from an energy production perspective, there's really nothing like methylene blue out there.
Now, as Dr. Sherr explains, methylene blue works at a cellular level to boost your energy, meaning the way that your cells communicate and function. But if your diet is heavy in carbohydrates, your cells can't perform at their best. So lowering the carbs and fueling with nutrient-dense foods like meat and fats supports optimal cellular function. Now, as you do this, as you start lowering the carbs, or even trying zero carb, you might experience some side effects like headache, nausea, and fatigue. Now, all this is very normal, especially at the beginning. So what you can do is do the salt trick. Add some high quality salt to your meals and also add it to your water. But if your symptoms still persist, you might want to consider adding in electrolytes, specifically one that has sodium, potassium, and magnesium, because this is so important for proper brain and body function. And that is why I have Element as a sponsor of today's episode. Now, I like to use a high quality supplement like Element because it has a science-backed mix of sodium, potassium, and magnesium without anything artificial and no preservatives. And I like to use half a sachet of the raw unflavored option every morning in my morning coffee, and the other half I add it to my water during the day. And right now, Element is offering this free sample pack on every order. So you're going to get 8 single servings of Element to try for free. So if you want this, just head to drinkelement.com/the Primal Podcast. Okay, so to summarize, when somebody is eating something like a steak, it gets broken down into energy through what's called the mitochondrial electron transport chain. And there is different complexes in that chain, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And the 5th one is where we produce ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate. That is the energy that we need to do everyday things like making hormones and brain function. But you did mention electrons. So I do want to understand, in that chain, what do electrons do in the body? Why do we need them?
So what the electrons do is they actually create a gradient. What they're doing is they're creating like a gradient where you're able to force a molecule. So everybody's heard of diffusion or osmosis, right? The idea that things go to a place where there's less of them, right? So if you have water in one location and you spill it, it's going to go everywhere, right? It's going to go as far away from the initial place that you drop that water, because that's how it works. Osmosis going across a membrane, for example. But what the body does is it creates a differential around membranes to create energy. And so, to create energy, you also have to have energy that's put into the system so that you actually can make that energy gradient happen. So in this case, electrons are flowing through, which then creates a potential for these cells, the part of you, your mitochondria, to be able to make these what are called protons go across a gradient that shouldn't want to go because there's more on that other side already. So it's basically forcing it against a diffusion gradient, or forcing it against gravity. If you want to think gravity, right, the opposite of gravity is up, right? So forcing yourself up requires energy, right? So think if you need like a jetpack, right? You need like an airplane to go. I don't have a jetpack at home. Maybe you do, but to force yourself up, you need something that's going to, like a rocket, right? You need to force yourself up. So that's what our system is really doing, is giving us a force. The electrons flowing give you a force to bring a molecule, hydrogen in this case, across that inner membrane of the mitochondria. And as a result of that, you created this gradient. And the gradient has a lot of potential, so when it comes back down, that hydrogen molecule through, it's called ATP synthase, which is basically a big rotor with RPM of like 6,000 RPM. It's a very, very fast and very strong motor that actually creates the ATP itself. So you can bond ATP from what's called adenosine diphosphate and make it to adenosine triphosphate. And it does that using this gradient and this energy. So the electron flow is required to make that initial jump of those hydrogen molecules over a gradient that already has too many of those hydrogen on that side. So it's against a gradient basically, and it requires energy.
So basically the electrons are kind of pushing down the chain to try to make energy, and there's processes along the way. And there's different complexes. Is that a very simple way to try to explain it?
Yeah, I mean, basically every complex, it kind of goes through like in an arc, and every time it goes through a complex, it creates more of electron, it makes more of a gradient so that you can bring things across. And there's 3 complexes, complex 1, 2, and 4, which are basically these channels. There are channels where the hydrogen ions can go through the channel as the electrons are going through, because you're creating enough gradient to kind of like, it's kind of like, think of like maybe like a catapult, like you're catapulting these things up each of these 3 complexes as the electrons are going through, because electrons are creating enough energy for you to force something against a gradient. That's probably the simplest way to think about it.
Okay, there was a reason why I asked that, because I wanted to understand NAD in that process, because many people are talking about NAD, but you mentioned previously that it's not just about NAD. Actually, the methylene blue could be actually more potent or effective as NAD, because people want to take these NAD supplements because they have this brain boosting ability. And that's in complex 1, is that correct?
Yeah, so NAD picks up electrons from your food, becomes NADH, and then it goes into this electron transport chain, and it donates one of those electrons over and becomes NAD plus again. And so as we get older, our pool of NAD plus goes down, and so people take NAD supplements as a way to enhance their NAD pool and make them feel better. They take NAD IVs and sub-Q. Well, there's not a lot of evidence that IV NAD has a huge amount of effect on brain NAD levels. There's, I think, a bit of what's called a boomerang effect. You're from Australia originally, right? So a boomerang effect where there used to be, everybody's like, oh, take NAD, take NAD, take NAD. But there's more interest now in understanding that that's not always probably the best thing for everybody to do, because NAD is also something that at high levels has also been associated with various cancer growth and cancers and cardiac dysfunction as well. So there's a lot more information out there that you may not want to. You have to be a little bit more careful with your NAD supplements than you realize, because there's other pathways where NAD can be shuttled, and those could be potentially oncologic pathways over time and cardiac dysfunction pathways. So, but in essence, we all do need NAD, right? NAD is very, very important, and what Methylene Blue can do is it can help you recycle the NAD that you already have more efficiently, especially if that complex 1 isn't working very well. And so the way I think about it, people ask me like, well, can I take NAD with Methylene Blue? I said, yeah, of course, because you can take your NAD because that's going to enhance your pool. And then Methylene Blue is going to be there to help support and recycle that, so you get more of it that can go into the electron transport chain. So, but I'm a little bit careful with NAD supplements these days. I'm not a big fan of NAD IVs and things. I think if you're going to take NAD probably in its precursor form, and vitamin B3 or maybe NMN is probably okay, but there's really not a lot of evidence that NAD itself can get into the cells very easily. And then there's also this potential these collateral pathways that may be causing a risk over time. So definitely something people should look a little more into before just taking NAD without thinking about it, especially the NAD IVs.
Interesting. Okay, let's move on to how we can use Methylene Blue, the uses. So we mentioned insulin resistance, and you mentioned the use of metformin is not the best because it does affect that complex 1. So if somebody has insulin resistance and they're on a good diet, should they be using Methylene Blue?
That's again a loaded question, right? It depends on really what the cause of their insulin resistance is on some level to be able to best understand how to use Methylene Blue in the most effective way. So for example, I was just speaking to a lady that specializes in perimenopause, and she was giving me this idea, which I didn't really think about at the time, that like many women that are going through menopause, they're during the perimenopausal state, they have high cortisol levels, like high stress levels, right? And it looks like they're insulin resistant, but it's just because their cortisol levels elevated all the time that their blood sugar is elevated. And it looked like, so it's not necessarily that their insulin resistance, their insulin level might be normal if you looked at it, but it's because their high blood sugars are because they're stressed all the time, for example. So it may be one of those things where you really want to focus on why somebody's in kind of stress mode all the time, why they're in fight or flight, before using Methylene Blue, at least not using it on its own. Thinking about using it more in the context of optimizing this, what I call this sympathetic spiral of doom. Basically, you have this sympathetic fight or flight that keeps you at, always on, always up, can't calm down, and then your mitochondria suffer as a result of that. Neurotransmitters get depleted, hormones get depleted, cortisol, really increases that blood sugar, and then also causes more mitochondrial dysfunction. And then you have this sort of cycle that happens because the mitochondria try to push out more stuff, more energy, but then the whole system starts breaking down because it's just not able to compensate. So when it comes to insulin resistance, I look at the etiology, I look at the reason as best I can, and see kind of where you want to approach first. Oftentimes, I will use a little bit of Methylene Blue as mitochondrial support there, but it may not be enough. You may not really have to be thinking about what else can you do to kind of break that sympathetic spiral, like really understand why they're always in fight or flight and what you can do to kind of down-regulate their nervous system in a way that they actually can start healing. Because Methylene Blue can help to some degree, but if you're already in that sympathetic fight or flight, it's not going to help with that so much. It's going to help support the mitochondria, which is important. But if you're not also addressing some of the reasons why your brain is on all cylinders all the time, is it because you're not getting enough sleep? Is it because you have stressful relationships? Is it because you don't think you can stop working because your company's going to stop working if you stop working? And there's all different types of reasons. Could be trauma from your childhood or from your adulthood and things like that could be really kind of sticking you in fight or flight and not feeling safe. And so these are really important aspects to when I think about insulin resistance. But in the end, we know that insulin resistance is the number one cause of mitochondrial dysfunction. So I do think that methylene blue could be helpful here, especially at low doses. The key is really just when you're starting methylene blue to start it really low, like 4 milligrams, 8 milligrams, 16, maybe 25. Like I find from a mitochondrial support perspective, those doses are really the best doses for most people to see the mitochondrial support that they need for more energy, more cognitive capacity, less brain fog, less exercise-induced fatigue, less pain, less inflammation. The higher doses, when you get to about 1 milligram per kilogram, so about 50 to 70 milligrams or above, that's when it becomes more anti-infective. And that's great if you're using it that way, but most products out there will kind of purport a dose that's up on those levels or higher, which I think is misguided for most people, unless they have a chronic infection or acute stress or acute infection, where I've used even higher doses of methylene blue in those cases. But in essence, insulin resistance is kind of one of those things. Well, if somebody tells me they have it, then you have to kind of you got to zoom out and kind of understand why, so that, yes, I can use some methylene blue to help support their mitochondria, but what else am I going to do to help them really shift their whole ecosystem to one that's healthier and more optimized?
It was a bit of a tricky question because it's a big problem and it's not really a disease, but it's a condition, and it could come from many other issues, not just obviously diet. It can come from, as you said, hormones, stress, job, etc., trauma, all these different things that need to be addressed. But it can be nice to support it along with doing all the other stuff. And I do want to talk about all the other stuff that we can do to improve our mitochondrial health, not just the methylene blue. But other things, so mental health, things like bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety. So the way that it can work is that it's an MAOA inhibitor, so monoamine oxidase inhibitor. What does that mean, and why should we care about it?
So when it comes to mental health disorders, you named a couple there specifically. What is happening here is kind of manyfold, right? We used to think that, for example, depression was a serotonin problem, but we now know that they've done a number of different what are called meta-analyses over the last couple of years, that we know that people with depression do not have lower levels of serotonin than people that do not have a depression. So we know that this whole serotonin hypothesis is wrong. And so people are depressed for sure, but it's not a serotonin issue. The same goes along with bipolar and with schizophrenia, with other mental health disorders. There are neurochemical things that are happening, okay, but it's not the only thing. Just like with depression, there are neurochemical things happening, but it's not the only thing. And what's underlying for all of these is mitochondrial dysfunction. And so, yes, methylene blue works as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, no doubt about it. And but before that, and with the way I kind of think about methylene blue as more of like a foundational piece, is like, where are we helping foundationally? Where are we helping from a mitochondrial perspective? Because if we help on the mitochondrial side, people are going to feel better. And that's because their energy enhancing system is working better. They're more energy efficient. Their detoxification systems are working better. And then on top of that, as their mitochondrial function is getting better, they're also getting more norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin from the methylene blue. But understand that these amounts of neurotransmitters increasing is dose dependent, meaning very small doses of methylene blue are going to give you just a little bit of extra serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. And higher doses of methylene blue are going to give you higher amounts. You talked about there's MAOI-A and MAOI-B. There's two different classifications or two different subtypes of MAOI. So at these lower doses, methylene blue is MAOI-A, and the higher doses MAOI-B, which also increases dopamine at those levels. But that's kind of neither here nor there. But in essence, when you look at a study where methylene blue helps with depression or bipolar or schizophrenia or other mental health issues or OCD, anxiety, it's not just because it's increasing those neurotransmitters. And that's a big point, because that's happening. And people do take methylene blue and feel a mood boost when they do take it oftentimes. But it's more than that. It's so much, it's deeper, because it's working on that mitochondrial dysfunction that's often so prevalent. And there's a really good example of this that I know. There's a nonprofit organization called Metabolic Minds. And they're a nonprofit that they treat patients with bipolar, schizophrenia, mental health disorders with the ketogenic diet, and their symptoms go away. Okay. And why do their symptoms go away? Right? Because we know that changing their fat burn, changing from a better source of fuel, like a ketogenic diet, is going to decrease inflammation. It's going to optimize their mitochondrial function. They're going to feel better, and all of a sudden, their mental health symptoms improve. And this is having nothing to do directly with their neurotransmitters, right? So they're not looking at their norepinephrine or dopamine or GABA or serotonin or whatever. They're looking directly at it as a mitochondrial disorder. And if you focus it that way, like I get stories all the time, like my anxiety went away after I took Methylene Blue, or my depression completely resolved. And they're like, oh, this is neurotransmitters. I'm like, yes, but no, right? That is something that's happening there. And if you're on these kinds of medications, like an antidepressant, for example, there is the capacity to wean yourself off with a practitioner helping you and start something like Methylene Blue instead. And I've a number of stories that I've heard over the years that of our practitioners using Methylene Blue and the products that my company makes to be able to wean themselves off. And even in like a good example would be this. I think this is a really good example, Rena. Like I had a lady, a colleague of mine that reached out maybe 6 months ago. She had 2 widowers in her practice, 2 gentlemen that had lost their wives, and they were about the same age, in their mid 70s, and they were both kind of in the doldrums, just like not doing well, not getting up, not moving. So definitely like on the depressed, grieving disorder aspect. She gave them 4 milligrams of Methylene Blue, and they were like different people. Like she was like, I don't know what happened. They were getting off the couch. They were starting to, get outside. They were calling their family. All it took was 4 milligrams of Methylene Blue. And so the question is why, right? So there is a neurotransmitter piece to that, but it's very, very mild at those kinds of doses. Really what that is like, what happens with all that stress, all that grief, all that trauma is that your mitochondria are like, holy crap, I can't do anything because you have so much stress, so much dysfunction as a result of that. And so as soon as you start revving up or making the mitochondria more efficient, it's like snapping your fingers with some people like that. So it's like all of a sudden. And so you have this beautiful capacity to see that you can make these shifts. Yes, it's a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, and this is important, but the mitochondrial piece is just the underlying aspect of why it works so well. And I know people, I think you mentioned this earlier, I forgot to mention when you did, about the synthetic aspect of Methylene Blue. I know many people in your community, in mine as well. I grew up the son of a chiropractor who didn't think that anything that wasn't from the ground should be even close to your mouth for many years. But the problem is, Rena, that we live in a synthetic world. We live in a world where we live under toxic lights. We have toxic environments. We have pollution everywhere. Our food, our water, our relationships, everything. And so we don't live in a natural world. And my response to the synthetic question is that we don't live in a natural world. Sometimes we need synthetic things to help us because we live in a synthetic world. And then correspondingly, not everything that's natural is good for us. You can eat the wrong berries and have diarrhea for 3 days. You can eat the wrong mushrooms in the forest and die of liver failure. And I've seen this happen. So it's about understanding why you're using it. That also, the final thing I'll say here is that, but as you get more optimized, as you get more ancestral, as you get the capacity to relieve your stress and calm your nervous system down and upregulate what's called your GABA system, which we can talk about, all of that, as that all is happening, your system is going to get more balanced. And as that balance is able to be achieved, or, the balance is, it's always sort of a, oscillating balance. We're never like at one absolute balance. But once you get around there and able to stay around there, that's when you need less, not more, to keep you there, right? But getting there and maintaining is not easy all the time.
Now, as Dr. Sherr mentions, we need to understand the root cause of inflammation, why we are getting disease, and change specific protocols to fix it. One includes our diet, the other is enhancing our GABA system, but one big important thing is toxins in our environment. And this includes toxins in our everyday skincare and what we put on our skin. Because whatever goes on your skin can enter your bloodstream, reach your brain, penetrate your cells, potentially causing long-term issues. And when I found out about this, that really made me stop and think. Because I have healed so much through a high-fat carnivore diet, but I realized I was still exposing myself to chemicals in my everyday skincare products. And that is why we launched the Primal Tallow Balms as a chemical-free solution for my skin and also for your skin. And they became so popular and they sold out very, very quickly. But then I got so many emails from you asking, well, Rena, what about a chemical-free body wash or a chemical-free soap? Well, for the past few months, I've been making my own tallow soap and shampoo bar. And honestly, it has been a game changer, even helping me with my sensitive skin. And now I'm super excited to share that with you. Our tallow balms are made from 100% natural grass-fed, grass-finished tallow. They cleanse gently without stripping the skin, keeping it hydrated, and I've even seen improvements in my skin texture. And they also naturally contain fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K2, nutrients that your skin needs for proper hydration and health. And the best thing is, There's no nasties, there's no preservatives, there's no artificial scents. It is just pure tallow. And I personally love to use this unscented bar every single day, and I even travel with it. And right now, the Primal is offering my viewers a free, natural Egyptian loofah with every tallow soap order. It is a perfect way to gently exfoliate and let the nutrients from the tallow really nourish your skin. So if you want this, just head to shop.theprimal.com. There's also a link in the description. So it has that aspect of it. So it slowly can increase the serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, but it's more acting on the mitochondria. And that's what you're saying around, that's how it's helping with these mental health issues, not the neurotransmitter piece. So you're very passionate about that. It's very nice. Okay.
Well, I think it's important just to kind of make that difference, because there are certain people that have emphasized in the essential community that all that's happening when you take methylene blue is it increases your serotonin, and that's why you feel better. But frankly, that's bullshit. And I want to make it clear to people that yes, there is a neurotransmitter piece to this, but it's dose dependent. Low doses, very little; high doses, more. But the key is that these low doses of methylene blue are significantly impacting your capacity to make energy and detox.
Brilliant. Okay, let's move on to the other uses. So we mentioned the insulin resistance piece and then the mental health piece. How about hypoxia, which is low oxygen? So when you're traveling or you're at altitude?
Yeah, so when you're at those particular situations, so I don't know if most people know this, but it's something that's important, is that when you're on an airplane and you're pressurized on a plane, you have that ear popping sensation. So they pressurize you to about 8,000 feet above sea level. So that's, I don't know, is that 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters? I'm really bad at the calculation here. I think it's somewhere around there. And so when you do that, if you don't live in a place that's already at those altitudes, I live in Colorado here, I'm 5,500 feet. And so I'm already kind of closer to that pressurization, but that's a sudden low oxygen state for all of you that are traveling. And when you have a sudden low oxygen state, the first thing you'll feel is tired. That's why most people that get on an airplane, as soon as they close the cabin door, they're like, oh, I feel sleepy. That's because your oxygen levels just dropped. And that's causing stress on your mitochondria, because as the oxygen levels go down, your capacity to make energy is going to go down. Your inflammation is going to go up. And then all of a sudden you're also on these aluminum machines that are also higher to the sun, so you get higher UV, more radiation. You have people that might be not the sick, not the wellest, maybe a little sicker than you are, that flying with you. So high risk for infection as well. And so what methylene blue can do actually in these cases, just like if you're at altitude, like climbing a mountain, is that it can compensate for these low oxygen states. And it does it in a really cool way. It can act just like oxygen in your cells, actually. And so just like we have oxygen, we breathe in oxygen so we can maintain energy production, you can use methylene blue as a way to compensate for mitochondrial dysfunction or the mitochondrial dysfunction related to the low oxygen state, because it works just like oxygen in your cells. And so you have this beautiful capacity to make more energy at these lower oxygen levels. And so you don't feel as bad when you get to your destination, because you had more oxygen, you didn't have more oxygen, but you had more methylene blue, which works just like oxygen in your cells, allowing you to have that and maintain energy capacity in the aerobic capacity for longer. So yeah, when you have methylene blue around at these high altitudes, you get less inflammation, less low oxygen stress, and you feel better when you get to where you're going.
Okay, last question. Hopefully this answer is yes. Does methylene blue help with fat loss or losing weight?
So I would say that it does it indirectly in the ways that I mentioned before, because it doesn't help with the fat loss directly, but it can help with mitochondrial efficiency. So the way that I've used this most in people that are trying to lose fat quickly is that when you do this, when you lose fat very, very quickly, you cause a significant amount of inflammation in the body, because all that fat that you're losing actually stores a lot of inflammation, a lot of inflammatory mediators and things like that. And when you lose the fat, all that gets dumped into circulation. And that circulation is your bloodstream, for example. And that's also going to go to your cells and your mitochondria. And so all that inflammation is going to be more prevalent in the mitochondria as a result of losing weight fast. And so methylene blue can be something that can be used as a way to support mitochondrial function while you're losing fat very fast. So I don't give methylene blue for weight loss, for example, but I give methylene blue to help support people that are on their weight loss journey, because it can help with that inflammatory cascade, or the inflammatory cascades that are happening when you lose weight very quickly.
Okay, very nice answer. Okay, next one is, I want to ask about methylene blue versus fasting, because I'm sure people are going to be thinking, well, I'm doing fasting. I'm doing OMAD, I'm doing 2MAD or alternate day fasting. That's supporting my mitochondria. Why should I use the methylene blue? What is the difference? Is there any difference, or link?
I've actually was just talking to a friend of mine recently. His name is Thomas DeLauer, and he did this whole video on using methylene blue during a fast. And I think part of this is that you can do this and actually see greater fat loss potentially during a fast without losing as much muscle as well if you're also trying to work out during a fast. The challenge oftentimes is that I find people that don't eat enough don't end up being able to maintain their lean body mass as easily. And so this is very common back 4, 5, 6 years ago when everybody was on the sort of fasting, intermittent fasting train. And then I saw people losing a lot of muscle. But methylene blue has this capacity, again, to help you continue to make energy effectively. And it also has this capacity to let you get to your lactate threshold later, which means that you can work out longer without having that burn and being able to having to stop working out. So, and then because of that, the efficiency aspect of things, it's actually revving up your body's recycling capacity when you're in the ketogenic state. And so you have this ability to mop up things faster and more efficiently at the same time when you're using methylene blue. So it has this capacity to help you maintain muscle mass, especially if you continue to work out when you're fasting, and also the capacity to kind of clean up and detox faster as well. So this is all, again, anecdotal. Let me be clear here, right? Because we don't have any studies that show this. This is just people like Thomas and others that have tried this to kind of see how you can use methylene blue in the realms of fasting. And so, one other way you can do this, interestingly enough, is that when you're doing fat fasting you're doing fasting and you're looking to transition yourself from, carb to fat burning or more ketogenic, that transition can be hard because people don't feel good when you're going from, carbohydrate, glucose burning to fat burning. And there is some potential evidence here, at least from people that have used the products, the methylene blue, that it can help with that transition because you're keeping things efficient, even if you have less of the usual substrate that you're used to and the other one's kind of coming online. So it has this capacity to kind of ease the transition from carb burning to fat burning as well, or to the ketogenic diet. So those are some of the ways that we're thinking about it. But of course, the other way is to not use it. Fine. And when you're fasting, don't use methylene blue and then try it with. And see how you feel and see if it gives you a little bit of extra energy, especially those days where you're doing the transition. You're 24 to 48 hours of fasting. If you're doing a long fast, for example, it can be supported and easier if you have some methylene blue on board.
Okay, let's talk about some cautions before we get into the dosing and what brands to buy and how to buy. So there is some caution that people say, well, okay, if you're on SSRIs or SNRIs, you should not be taking it. Is that true?
So the answer is that, and we alluded to this earlier, that methylene blue does increase the amount of serotonin in the synapse, just like the serotonergic drugs, SSRI, SNRIs. But the key is that it's dose dependent, and the methylene blue at low doses is only going to do a little bit of this, and high doses is going to do more. You should definitely not take IV methylene blue if you're taking these drugs, the SSRIs, SNRIs, or dopaminergic drugs, or any drug that's increasing norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin. Okay, especially norepinephrine and serotonin. But it's not terribly worrisome, okay, if you are taking an oral SSRI, oral methylene blue with an SSRI. But I would also recommend, if you're doing this, that you work very closely with a provider to make sure that it's safe for you to do. The technical risk is something called serotonin syndrome. Serotonin syndrome is extremely rare. It's only been shown with IV methylene blue and oral SSRIs at high doses. That being said, I have seen people with some GI distress that I've seen over the years that have taken methylene blue along with their SSRIs because most people don't know this, but you actually make over 90% of your serotonin in your gut. So if you're increasing serotonin, you're going to have more of your serotonin increase in your gut, of course. So that can cause things to kind of move faster and cause diarrhea, some abdominal discomfort in people. So if you're on an SSRI and SNRI, you can definitely take methylene blue, but you should only do it in the context of working with a provider to making sure that you don't have any major symptoms when you take it. But it's really quite safe and low risk as long as you're on low doses of methylene blue. So that's the other key, is making sure you're staying on very low doses and titrating your dose over time instead of starting off at a high dose, which I don't typically recommend unless it's an acute issue or a chronic infection. And even if it's a chronic infection, you want to start off low and increase over time. If you start off low with methylene blue and you increase slowly, you typically don't see any issues with SSRIs or SNRIs. But again, do it with practitioner supervision just to be safe.
Okay. It's interesting that Dr. Boss, who is a big doctor in our ketogenic circle, she was talking about the serotonin syndrome and said, as you said, it's very rare, only a few cases, and still you should only use very low doses. So she praises it a lot. So that's fantastic. So the next one I want to ask is, does it cause a blue brain?
So there was a really great clickbait article that was released in about February, March of 2025, for those that are listening. And it showed autopsies of these people that had died and they had blue brains. Some of them were blue because of methylene blue and others were blue from other pigments, actually. But the reason for this, and it was very well done to scare people that if you take methylene blue, you're going to have a blue brain. The reason why these brains were blue is that these patients received extremely high doses of IV methylene blue, up to 3 milligrams per kilogram. And the reason why they were getting methylene blue is that they were almost dead. They were actually getting it from CPR. So their heart had stopped, their lungs had stopped working, severe infections, trauma. So these were last-ditch ways of trying to save these people's lives. Unfortunately, they were not successful, obviously, because you were looking at their brains. But these are extremely high doses. 3 milligrams per kilogram IV is nowhere near what you would use orally and clinically in the world of mitochondrial dysfunction, or even as an anti-infective for most cases. And so like the dose equivalent there for 3 milligrams IV, 3 milligrams per kilogram IV would be somewhere around 300 milligrams of oral or IV. So basically that's 300 milligrams IV of methylene blue. Okay. And so the thing about IV obviously is it's going to hit the body and the brain much faster. That's why I mentioned earlier, you don't want to take IV methylene blue on any dose of SSRI. Okay. So that's that kind of so if you're on an SSRI, you don't want to take IV methylene blue for sure. The blue brain thing is only happening because of those extremely high doses that were given over very small periods of time. But in essence, what does happen, and we know this, is that methylene blue at these lower doses than the mitochondria concentrates there. And what I didn't mention about methylene blue history earlier is that the way I first learned about it, and many people that are in chemistry and biochemistry, is because you can use the methylene blue to highlight blue parts of the cell when you look at it under the microscope. And this particular part of the cell mostly that's going to have the methylene blue is, not surprisingly, your mitochondria, right? So this is where we found out actually that methylene blue was actually having an effect by knowing that it actually concentrated in that part of the cell. And so you have methylene blue that is getting to be blue in the mitochondria for a period of time at these low doses. That's part of how it works, okay? There's two states that methylene blue lives in. It's in a blue state and a colorless state, actually. And it cycles back and forth because it's a redox cycler, as we were talking about before. In its oxidized form, it's blue, and its reduced form, it's actually colorless. And so it goes back and forth in the cells, like back and forth from blue to colorless. But it's not going to make your brain blue. You're going to urinate out your methylene blue within about 4 to 6 hours is the half-life. So within about 20 hours for sure, it's out of your system entirely for most people.
Okay, I think people might be freaked out thinking, I'm going to get a blue brain. So, makes sense.
No brain blue. Stay away from IV and don't die. That's all.
So you have been a doctor for a very long time, seeing so many different patients. I'm curious, what is your biggest success story with somebody taking the methylene blue, and how has it helped them fix some sort of problem?
There's just so many stories that I've had over the years. I've had people that have tried everything for various kinds of things. I had one lady, she was a lady that had mold and had mold for a long time. She was a physical therapist and had to stop working for a couple of years because of dealing with mold and getting it out of her body. And she had some retesting done. Everything was gone, but she still felt terrible. She couldn't get back to work. She had a lot of brain fog, a lot of fatigue, a lot of joint pain. And then after about 3 or 4 days of taking methylene blue, really at low doses, maybe at 8 milligrams, all of her pain and discomfort, all of her energy came back. And she was able to get back to work within a couple of weeks. And so it was somebody that had been out of work for a couple of years when this happened. I had another guy recently that I spoke to that told me that he had lifelong anxiety. And he started taking methylene blue and his anxiety went away within a couple of days and hasn't come back. And this was multifactorial, of course, as he kind of thought about it. He was changing his diet at the time. He was doing other things, but it was a methylene blue that was really kind of the linchpin in the whole thing. It really was the thing that really changed everything for him. I had another lady that I work with for a while with long COVID and a lot of brain fog, a lot of concentration issues. And we were able to, it was taking a while for us to get her better, just because these kinds of things can take a while. But as soon as I started adding methylene blue, her pain went down dramatically. She went from taking 800 milligrams of ibuprofen 3 times a day to taking the Methylene Blue twice daily, and then periodically CBD as she needed it. But she was able to come off the ibuprofen entirely, which was a big win for her. And so lots of different stories like this. I've had people with chronic low blood pressure and on high heart rates, for example, that have a really difficult time with walking, and they lose their balance and they get dizzy and lightheaded all the time. I've seen some amazing stories, and I've actually witnessed this, where they start taking low doses of Methylene Blue, and finally their blood pressure is stable. They can actually walk around without getting dizzy and lightheaded. And that's an interesting example of something called the effect of Methylene Blue on nitric oxide, because there's a lot of questions about that in the community as far as, well, does Methylene Blue have a detrimental effect on nitric oxide? And nitric oxide is a compound in our body that's very, very important for vascular health, for cardiac health, for brain health, but it's also something that gets released in a detrimental way. There's a reason for it, but the aspect of the releasing that happens that I'm referring to here is when you have nitric oxide released because of infection, inflammation, and trauma. You get a lot of nitric oxide that gets released in the bloodstream. It causes low blood pressure, causes inflammation, it causes inflammatory cascades to kind of go haywire. And Methylene Blue can actually neutralize that kind of nitric oxide in circulation at low doses. At high doses, it can have an effect on the endogenous supply of nitric oxide. So you have to think about that. But that's also the reason it causes vasoconstriction and can be very helpful in like acute sepsis or, like low blood pressures because of septic shock. But in essence, this nitric oxide binding or basically neutralizing in circulation at these low doses of Methylene Blue can be great for people that have low blood pressure or have chronic inflammation because of low blood pressure and things like that. So those are some of the things that ring off the top of my head. I also have kind of a cool story on the other side of the spectrum, which is I live in Colorado, as I mentioned, and here we have the highest elevation ultra marathon in the world. It's called the Leadville Race. And some of you that are listening probably have heard of it before. And so this is 100 miles. And I work with a guy that wanted to do better this particular year. He had 2 major issues. He had one that was based on just his ability to maintain aerobic capacity for that long. And the other one was he had diarrhea at the end of his race and he couldn't stop pooping himself. And this is actually quite common. And so I did 2 things for him. We increased one particular amino acid for him to take called glutamine, which is the primary fuel of the small intestine, also affects the GABA system, which we can talk about if we have time. But the major other intervention was 36 milligrams of Methylene Blue every 4 hours. And he shaved 3 hours off of his time that year. And he also didn't have any diarrhea when he got to the end of it. So he's a very happy camper. And so the Methylene Blue itself there was increasing his aerobic capacity, his capacity to make energy for longer, for a very extreme distance of running. And I've seen this across the board in people that are doing endurance work, that they can maintain their aerobic capacity, their capacity to make energy from the mitochondria, from oxygen for longer as a result of having Methylene Blue around. And I actually have a couple patients that won't exercise without it because they can maintain their heart rate at a higher level for longer before they have to stop. And there is also some evidence, at least anecdotally, that you can actually recover from a workout faster with Methylene Blue on board because you can recover at a higher heart rate, interestingly enough. And then maybe the final thing, and I mentioned this earlier, is that lactate threshold, so that you reach your lactate threshold later because you're maintaining that aerobic capacity for longer. And so you can go farther longer using Methylene Blue on that side as well. So I know that was a lot, but there's some stories for you.
That's a lot of success stories, but I think it just goes to show that how well this Methylene Blue can work. And just a point on the anxiety piece, I suffered for that for I think over 20 years, and doctors put me on Zoloft, medications. And honestly, as somebody that went through that, nothing worked. The only thing that worked for me was when I changed my diet, all the behavioral changes and everything. And if I had that Methylene Blue enhancement, that would have helped, because back then nothing was helping.
Yeah. Let me just reflect on that for a minute, because I think it's super important, Rena, is that, again, we mentioned earlier that we thought that depression, anxiety were serotonin problems, right? So your doctor thought they'd give you a little bit of an SSRI and that would make things better. But the problem is that it's misguided, because we know that in some people, SSRIs are very helpful. They do increase mood and they do help some people, but we do know now that oftentimes anxiety, depression, these are not serotonin deficiencies. They're actually potentially GABA deficiencies. GABA is our primary inhibitory or relaxing neurotransmitter in the brain. It's the brakes of our brain. And when there's not enough GABA around, the brain can go haywire. I mean, we already have on average about 70,000 thoughts per day. That's our average number of thoughts per day. And when we're anxious and we're stressed and we're depressed, it goes up to 120,000 thoughts per day. And that's because the GABA system is dysregulated. And if you don't put that back in balance, you're not going to feel better no matter what you do. And or even if you feel a little bit better, it's not really getting to the heart of why the system's not working the way it's supposed to work. And so enhancing the GABA system can be gigantic. And one of the things I was just mentioning about the Leadville guy is that glutamine is actually the precursor for GABA in the brain. It goes to glutamate initially, and then GABA, and glutamate's our primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain, and then it gets converted into GABA in the brain using vitamin B6 and magnesium. So many of us are mineral deficient, so magnesium deficient. We're micronutrient deficient, so we don't have B6 to be able to convert there. And then we also deplete our GABA very quickly when we have stress, anxiety, toxins in our environment. We can't make it very well because we have inflammation. And so the reason why I wanted to mention is that it's that sympathetic spiral that you're just describing, where like if you have the capacity to both work on the GABA system as well as working on the mitochondrial support piece, that combination is like a home run for people. And it really does work very, very quickly, especially if you kind of take it from both angles at the same time rather than just one or the other.
Yeah, I think I had to work on both. So it was the diet part of it. So I think also doing a higher fat ketogenic approach really, really helped me. But also, as you mentioned, that GABA system and the calming effect. So I really changed my environment, my thoughts, the way I would respond to things. I used to have really bad OCD, but part of it was also to do with, this is like a therapy session, but part of it was also to do with
sometimes we need them, yeah.
Childhood trauma. So I think it's just important to understand that there's so many things that can affect the mitochondria, and all these things that we're talking about are things to help with that. The role of diet, Methylene Blue. We're also going to talk about the GABA system. But final question about Methylene Blue. Doses, where can I buy it from?
The doses are really, really important. And I mentioned earlier when I got sidetracked about the chapters of Methylene Blue about the quality as well. So dosing, for the most part, lower doses are often going to be better than higher doses. Lower doses, what I mean by that is anywhere between 4 to 25 milligrams of Methylene Blue, once to twice daily, typically taken in the morning around 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning when you wake up, and then maybe around noon to 1 o'clock. I don't have everybody dose twice daily, but if you need to dose twice daily, that's typically the dosing that I will give people. So I've developed a pretty standard way of titrating people over the last couple of years because I find it to be the best way to do this, which is to start off at 4 milligrams once daily, and then increase your dose every 3 to 5 days until you start feeling like you're getting an effect from the compound. Now, depending on that effect, you might want to increase your dose further, but once you start feeling better at a particular dose, say it's 12 milligrams, for example, and that's your dose. Then you have to decide how often you're going to take that Methylene Blue. You're going to take it once a day, you're going to take it twice a day, or you're going to take it just periodically as you need it. A lot of that's going to depend on where you're starting from and where you need to go. So if you have a long way to go, then it might be something you need to take for weeks or even months before you stop it or before you wean it down, as opposed to somebody that's more optimized that might just need it for airplanes and for aerobic work and things like that. I mean, I typically take Methylene Blue around 4 milligrams up to twice daily, maybe 3 times a week on average, unless I'm traveling, and then I'll take more, and then I'll get more supported that way. So these lower doses, the 4 to 25 milligrams, are really great for mitochondrial support. This is energy and detox. Feel more energy, feel less brain fog, feel less pain, have better exercise tolerance at these lower doses. Okay. Now, if you get to be on the higher doses, about 1 milligram per kilogram or above, it's about 50 to 70 milligrams or above. This is when it becomes more anti-infective and also really good for acute mitochondrial stress, like acute trauma, like acute concussion, acute like musculoskeletal injury, for example. This is when you want to use the higher doses because you need the higher amounts of support. But these higher doses are also anti-infective because the body, what it does when Methylene Blue comes in is it makes a compound called hydrogen peroxide at these doses. And hydrogen peroxide, people have heard about it because you can buy it at the store, but it actually is something that our cells make. Our cells make hydrogen peroxide to kill microorganisms that aren't supposed to be there. And so at these higher doses of Methylene Blue, you get this microorganism capacity to kill these things. And that can be great as an antiviral and antifungal, antibacterial. And so I'll use up to typically about 2 milligrams per kilogram in acute viral and bacterial and fungal infections. Under practitioner guidance, I recommend doing this only because you don't want to be at these high doses for long periods of time. And then you also have to watch very careful that you don't actually need an actual antimicrobial and antifungal to go along with it. Like, for example, for me as a clinician, I can work with a patient that has urinary tract infections, and we give them 2 days or 3 days of, sometimes up to 5 days of 2 milligrams per kilogram oral methylene blue, so like 150 milligrams, and watch them carefully. If they don't need antibiotics, we're good to go. But sometimes things don't go that way and you still need them. But I found to be very successful that way, but you need to watch yourself carefully. You don't want to do this on your own without practitioner supervision. That's the thing. I use it also for acute viral infections like acute COVID, for example. Like there's some pretty good evidence with COVID and the anti-COVID properties of methylene blue, especially when combined with red light, for example. And there's some pretty good studies on that. So in essence, the dosing above a milligram per kilogram is really for infection, for severe mitochondrial stress. And so I have a lot of my patients that will keep methylene blue in their medicine cabinet at my request at these higher levels when they need it, just in case. And like I'm a prime example of this. 2-3 weeks ago, I partially tore my calf, and that was fun. And that's been a journey getting back from. But I was taking high amounts. I was taking 50 milligrams of methylene blue daily for several days. This is on a higher level because I needed the anti-inflammatory support while you have like a pretty significant inflammatory response from something like that. But in essence, typically for most people, I'm having them take, from more of like a health optimization perspective, 4 to 8 milligrams per dose, maybe 3 to 5 days a week, or more if they need it for additional support. But so where can they buy it? That's your next question. So I have a company called Transcriptions that sells methylene blue in the United States. We were the first company to come out with commercial products with methylene blue back in 2020. Our first product was actually called Blue Canatine, and that one is a combination of methylene blue with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. It's our focus stimulant product that works as well as many of the things that you guys have probably tried that on the pharmaceutical side, but without the come down and crash, without the jitters and all those kinds of things. And so from there, we came out with something called Just Blue, which is 16 milligrams of pure methylene blue. That's available as well. And then we have another one called Tro Plus Blue, which is our practitioner only brand. So we make something called a dissolvable lozenge or a troche that can be dissolved in the mouth and be swallowed. If you dissolve in the mouth, your mouth is going to be pretty blue at the end of the whole thing. But the blue in the mouth it's not required. You can swallow it. If you do have more cognitive issues, though, sometimes dissolving in the mouth is faster because buccal troches, the way they're designed is to make them so they're fast acting directly into the bloodstream. There are liquids out there. There are capsules out there as well. You just have to be really careful about the quality of what you're getting. The challenge with methylene blue is that it could be contaminated on production with heavy metals, as I mentioned. Even the pharmaceutical grade, USP grade methylene blue can be contaminated with higher levels than you'd imagine. And then the other issue we're finding is that a lot of companies now, like we were the first company that came out with a product in 2020. Now that there's 40 or 50 companies that are selling methylene blue, the challenge is that most of it's in liquid form. Okay, liquids themselves are very difficult because it's very difficult to maintain a potency of liquid. So oftentimes the liquids have less potency than they say on the label. And then the other aspect is that these companies are coming out with these certificates of analysis, which are directly from the companies that they're getting the products from. So hypothetically, when you get a product, you should have a certificate of analysis or an ingredient, for example. Say you get methylene blue from a company, from a manufacturer, it should have a certificate of analysis from an independent lab. The problem is you don't really know if that's an independent lab if you're getting it from another country. And so what we do is that we get ours from Japan and Korea. Typically, we get our methylene blue in the country. We test it again to make sure that with another independent lab to make sure that it meets the label requirements and the specs. So it's the potency that we want. It's the purity that we want. It's not contaminated with heavy metals and all those kinds of things. But there's very few companies that are doing that. And then, what's interesting, this is a symptom actually for the entire supplement industry arena. It's not just methylene blue, that a lot of companies are just trusting the certificates of analysis that are coming from other countries without doing their own work. And it was just an expose I was just watching a couple of weeks ago on creatine gummies having no creatine in them, even though the certificate of analysis that said it had creatine in them, because these companies were getting the creatine from these companies and these manufacturers from other countries that said they had creatine in them, but they had no such thing. It was just sugar, right? And so you have to be super careful where you're getting stuff from. And methylene blue is probably the epitome of the example because you don't want it to be contaminated. If you feel bad taking a liquid methylene blue, it could very well be because it doesn't have because it's contaminated. And another corresponding thing that we find is that people take our troches at 4 milligrams or 8 milligrams and take a liquid that's supposedly 4 milligrams or 8 milligrams and feel entirely different at our level of taking it compared to theirs, because ours is actually the dose, because the way we designed and manufacture it's going to be exactly what you get every single time. So be wary out there if you're looking for Methylene Blue. Check out their USP grading. That's absolutely necessary. You don't want to get industrial, chemical, or fish tank grade Methylene Blue. That's out of the gate. But from there, you have to look at the next step, which is look at their certificate of analysis. Where was it done? Is it a copy or is it some of these have actually been forged? It's actually crazy. And so, I mean, the challenge with the supplement industry, as you know, Rena, is that it's not very well regulated. And so you have to trust the company to do their own due diligence. And I guess maybe a final public service announcement is that please do not buy your supplements on Amazon if you can, because the problem is that there is tons of counterfeit stuff on Amazon. You don't know what you're getting. Even some of the more reputable brands out there, I know, have had counterfeit companies come in with their same name and sell tons of their counterfeit product instead. This is when you're looking for something that helps with your prostate, and then all of a sudden you're taking Viagra by accident. Or maybe you're not sad about it, but like there's a lot of contaminated supplements out there with things that you would be that are unexpected. But that's the nature of the supplement world. So in essence, to sum up, low doses are more optimal for most people with Methylene Blue. Watch out for your quality. USP is not enough. If you need a higher dose, it could be for an infection, for acute stress, and that's okay. But definitely, if you're going to be using a higher dose, I highly recommend that you work with a practitioner before starting or as you're going. And then titration. Start off low and go slow. When you find your optimal dose, you will know it. Maybe that's the last point, is that it's not like Methylene Blue builds up in your system over weeks to months. Once you find the right dose, you know.
Okay. I think it's really good that you spell out all of these different cautions that we need to know about Methylene Blue and where to find it. Because sometimes, when you speak to someone, they're just trying to sell something. But it's nice if you understand, okay, this is what it is. This is the quality that you need. And this is where you need to get it from. But also know all the other crap that's out there. And it's very common with everything that we see. So I'm going to leave a link for your company in the show notes so people can click on that and have a look. But I do want to ask, so closing now on the Methylene Blue, I want to ask about enhancing the GABA system, because that's also part of mitochondrial health. What is the GABA system?
So GABA is your primary brakes of your brain. So our on switch is our glutamate system, and our norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. You guys know about those already, but glutamate people don't know about actually, but glutamate is actually the primary excitatory neurotransmitter of the brain, and GABA is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter. So it's the gas pedal and it's the brakes. And we're always supposed to be in balance between this glutamate and GABA. The problem is that most of us in this world are now GABA deficient. And we mentioned this earlier. GABA deficiency can cause anxiety, depression, stress, insomnia, because the GABA system is the brakes. I mean, I don't know about where it is you are in the world now, but at least in the United States, it is the hustle culture, sleep when you're dead, and, go. Hustle, and don't know how to turn that off switch on. So turn on the off switch is what we say. And that off switch is the GABA system. And so if you're stressed all the time, you're depleting GABA. If you're toxic, you're depleting GABA. If you are mineral and micronutrient deficient, if you have gut inflammation, you are GABA deficient. And the problem is you can't just take a GABA supplement and see if it's going to work, because the problem with GABA supplementation is that GABA is too big of a molecule to get across into the brain. And so if it does work, if you take a GABA supplement and it works for you, it's likely because you have a leaky brain. Your brain's not doing what it's supposed to do to keep things out. It's called your blood-brain barrier. Many of us get a leaky brain when we have a leaky gut. So they're the most common correlations. So if you have a leaky gut, you have a leaky brain many of the time. So great example, unfortunate examples are people that had COVID infections, and then after COVID got reactivation of Lyme or mold or EBV or some other viral infection. This is because the gut got very leaky very quickly, caused systemic inflammation. The inflammation also affected the blood-brain barrier and then caused some of these viral reactivations to get across into the brain that weren't an issue before. And so you got to fix the gut. You have to fix the brain barrier, that's for sure. And you have to think about enhancing the GABA system in other ways, but breaking that sympathetic spiral of doom is really what it comes down to. How are you going to do it? What are the main drivers of that? You talked briefly, Rena, about trauma, for example. Like if you have trauma as a kid, you're going to be in fight or flight more of the time than you want to be. And that GABA system is going to get more depleted and you don't have an off switch. And so you got to figure out how to get that back on. And so that's really, really important. And then looking at diet and lifestyle. And like you said, you went keto and you got the mitochondrial efficiency of that, but you also got more GABA that way too. Being more ketogenic actually increases the amount of GABA in your brain. So you did some things that were working on that GABA system at the same time. But to make big changes, you probably had to do additional things over time, really to kind of rewire the brain. But what you can do right now to help people, you can change their diet, you can change their lifestyle. But that's not always easy, but you can supplement with other things that actually support the GABA neurotransmitter system without being GABA directly. So number one, you want to help with that efficiency of getting that glutamate to convert over to GABA. So vitamin B6 and magnesium. Almost everybody that comes to see me, that's like the first couple things that I put on because everybody's deficient in those two micronutrients. Typically, it's a whole activated B complex and not just B6, but definitely magnesium as well because most people are magnesium deficient. But then at the same time, looking at other things that can enhance the GABA system immediately so that all of a sudden you get a downregulation of that stress response. So what are some of these things? Like some compounds that I like, one called kava. So people have heard of kava before. Even CBD and CBG or CBN. These are non-psychoactive cannabinoids that work on the GABA receptor. They also work on the endocannabinoid system, which is our body's own internal kind of balancing homeostatic system that things like CBD, CBN, and CBG actually work on too. THC, by the way, has the opposite effect. THC actually blocks the GABA receptor, and this is why people that take THC can get sort of an anxiety response. Just kind of note there for people. Also, if you drink a lot of caffeine, a lot of stimulants, if you're taking opioids, if you're on certain other medications, you are going to deplete your GABA system too, by the way. So you have to be very, very careful there. But I support the GABA system by using things like the ones I described. Also, some really cool ones that one called vitamin B3 GABA, so it's called nicotinol GABA, which actually has a way to get across into the brain. And so there's a cool product that prescription is called Trocom that has B3 GABA that gets across with CBD, CBG, and kava that works as an anxiolytic or decreases anxiety but doesn't actually cause a lot of sedation because it has that B3 in there. And then the other compound that I like a lot is something called agarin, which is from a psychedelic mushroom called the Amanita muscaria mushroom or the fly agaric mushroom. This is the mushroom that is famous in Santa Claus mythology in northern Siberia, Alice in Wonderland, Mario Brothers. It's the red cap with white spot mushroom. And one of the ingredients is neurotoxic that causes psychedelic experiences. That's not the one we use in the product. The other one we use, it's called agarin. And agarin is a long-acting molecule, that compound that works on the GABA receptor. And it does in a really cool way. It actually binds to where GABA would bind, and you can actually use things that bind in other sites and help combine these together. And you just don't want to stay away from things that like benzos, like Ativan, Xanax, Valium. You want to stay away from sleep drugs as much as you can. And of course, like the reason is that these cause tolerance, withdrawal, and dependence over time. And there's a legal one as well that doesn't require prescription that everybody loves. Alcohol, right? Alcohol is also going to cause an enhancement of the GABA system, but it depletes GABA too. And so you get this GABA feeling, so you feel relaxed and cool, like great, calm. But at the same time, you're also depleting GABA very, very quickly. And as a result of that, you get this sort of reactive glutamate toxicity. The glutamate levels are higher because you deplete all your GABA. Remember, those are in balance, right? And so you have this imbalance there. And then you're also depleting all that GABA. And so you get tolerance, withdrawal, dependence. So you want to stay away from the alcohol. It trashes your sleep. Stay away from the benzos and the sleep drugs. They increase your risk of dying from anything. It's called all-cause mortality. But enhancing the GABA system immediately in a natural way can actually get you to feel what it feels like to calm down. And once you can feel that feeling, there is a there, which, we can say in meditation it doesn't exist, but in this it does, is that you have a there, which you can, okay, now this is where I need to go back to. This is where I need to come back to. And this is how I can get there with diet, with lifestyle, with meditation, with exercise. That's what it feels to have a regulated GABA system.
Brilliant. Okay, last question. Red light therapy. This is fascinating because many people want to sell like red light therapy now. Does that help with mitochondrial health?
So it does, yeah. So it has a couple different effects. And I was pretty skeptical with red light too, for many years. I'm like, it's just a red light. I mean, really? But you're just like a panel, like standing in front of it. But then you think about sunlight, like how important sunlight is for all of us, for all the different various reasons. And the sunlight has all these various spectrums of light in it. And one of them is red light. Red light is more in the spectrum in the morning when you wake up and in the evening and during sunset. But this red light, what it does is it powers your mitochondria. It actually goes in and works on that fourth complex in the mitochondria, allowing you to maintain and enhance that electron flow so you can help make more energy. And so And it does this also by increasing nitric oxide production as well in those mitochondria. So you have more vasodilation, you have dilation of those blood vessels. And dilation is a good thing. You want to be able to dilate and constrict, because that's how our heart and our blood vessels stay healthy. And so I combine it a ton with Methylene Blue, as I mentioned earlier, because the combination is synergistic. You're both enhancing energy production, and then the Methylene Blue, in addition, is also helping that detoxification side of things too. So a great combination is to take some Methylene Blue, wait about 30 to 45 minutes or maybe up to an hour, and then go in front of your red light panels if you have them, or go for a walk and get some sunlight on. You don't have to, if you're worried about wrinkles and photo aging on your face, put some sunscreen on. I used to be against that, but no, I'm cool with that. But the rest of your body, age away, right? Come on, everybody. I mean, unless you really care about what you look like entirely in the mirror, right? But having some sunlight exposure on the rest of your body is really, really important. And so, I've been healing from a calf injury, and so what I've been doing is taking my Methylene Blue, and then 45 minutes later, going in front of the red light panel and using that as a combination effect. And I get actually, what's kind of nice, I get like a full body response to that. I get lots of good energy from the combination.
Interesting. So how often should someone do that? How many times a week, and how often? Like how long?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it depends on your goals. I mean, I think in general, you could use, and something could be used daily, to be honest, for most people. It doesn't have to be used for more than 7 or 10 minutes at a time. So you don't need like a huge amount of exposure, but typically what, most of the protocols that I've seen over the years are 7 to 10 minutes on a side. So if you're, naked in front of your red light panel for 7 minutes, and then turn around and get another 7 minutes, and then you're done, right? You don't want to wear clothing, and you also don't need to wear eye protection. There used to be a thought that you needed to wear eye protection for red light panels, but in essence, there actually has been some studies showing that there might be some benefits to vision over time using red light in the eyes as well. So just for people that are, typically with the red light panels they come with like goggles or something. Now, this is different than a UV light. Okay, just to be clear, this is not a sun lamp. A sun lamp requires UV protection of the eyes. This is not a sun lamp. Because there's some newer products out there that are combining the UV and along with red light together. So you have to be careful as to know what you're getting. I had a friend of mine that got what's it called? It's keratinitis. It's called snow blindness. So basically, if you get high UVs in your eyes without protection, you will get keratinization of your eyes, and you'll get blindness for a short period. It'll go away, but it's very dangerous. So you want to make sure you have eye protection for UV is what it comes down to. But with red light therapy, you're good.
Okay, Dr. Sherr, that has been an absolute amazing episode about mitochondrial health. Methylene Blue, we spoke about the GABA system and red light therapy. How can people find you if they want to see you more?
So check it out at Transcriptions.com is the company. That's the company that sells the products that has Methylene Blue in them. Also the GABAergic things. We have things called Trocom and Troz. But in the end, I'm here to educate everybody. So like, if you're not interested in the products, that's okay. It's more just giving you a sense of what's out there, and like high level mitochondrial dysfunction, GABAergic dysfunction are kind of everywhere. So to be thinking about this in your personal life, your professional life, your friends, your family, it can go a huge way, I promise. If you're interested in my stuff, check it out at my website is drscottsherr.com, DRSCOTTSHERR.com. You can find me at Dr. Scott Sherr on Instagram, at Transcriptions as well on Instagram. We also have a YouTube channel at Transcriptions. And we have a nonprofit organization called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice that trains practitioners on optimized health. If you're licensed or non-licensed, you're looking to work with people and optimize, check it out at homehope.org.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. All the links are going to be in the show notes. Thank you, Dr. Sherr. Thank you for joining me today on this episode with Dr. Scott Sherr. If you're learning from and enjoying these free episodes, please feel free to hit the subscribe button. That's an excellent zero-cost way to support what we do here. You can also find me on other social media accounts. I'm on Instagram and on Twitter under the name of The Primal Podcast. Now, if you love this episode, check out this one by Dr. Nathan Bryan. It is all about nitric oxide, which is a naturally producing gas in our body that can help with blood pressure regulation and our heart. But there are ways that we are destroying our nitric oxide, and Dr. Bryan will talk about the natural ways that you can increase it and why you should never use mouthwash. Finally, thank you for your interest in root cause healing, and I'll see you next week.